I've always been very spiritually open. And when I say spiritual, I don't necessarily mean like religious or practicing anything particular, but I've always had a feeling and a knowing that there is more to life than what we see in the physical. And I realized grief isn't just about someone passing away, and that's what we often associate it with, but it's actually constantly underpinning everything. Like, it's the becoming of something new, and often it gets labeled as something else because it's easier to diagnose things and treat them rather than actually look at the heart underneath and the feeling underneath.
When you talk about grief isn't just the person transitioning from life to death, that there's so many other transitions.
That they didn't know this was possible, like a different way was possible, and that's what's put them off ever seeking healing, because they thought, well, I don't want to talk to a therapist for 7 years.
Well, haere mai, from my heart place to your heart place, Ellie, to the Heart Place Hospital podcast.
It's so cool to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're most welcome. So I'm so delighted to welcome you to our first podcast of 2025. And today we're joined by the incredible Ellie Bambury, a soul first grief guide and end-of-life celebrant. And we're especially grateful for our collaboration at the end of last year, Glitter and Grief fundraiser, which was a beautiful showcase of the strength of community in times of loss. So thank you so much for that. And we'll put this into the show notes as well, so people can watch that as well. So, Ellie, you are renowned for your compassionate and holistic approach to guiding individuals through the complexity of grief. With over 10 years of experience in supporting young people and families, you offer soulful tools that help transform grief into a journey of growth and healing. As a published author, Ellie, you bring a wealth of knowledge and deeply personal perspective, having found yourself drawn to this path at a very young age. And in today's session, we will share your journey into this work and provide tools for navigating grief in a soulful way, and explore what often holds us back from fully moving through grief. And your insights will help us view grief as a sacred invitation to evolve, encouraging us to embrace the process with openness and compassion. So let's dive in.
Let's dive in. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So I think the very first question is, and it comes up in your bio, is you have been drawn to this at a very young age, and how did that come about? And I'm curious to hear.
Every time I get asked this question, a different kind of way about answering comes up, and I always just trust that whatever I say is kind of what's needed for this particular answer. I guess in this instance, from the young age perspective, I've always been very spiritually open. And when I say spiritual, I don't necessarily mean like religious or practicing anything particular, but I've always had a feeling and a knowing that there is more to life than what we see in the physical. And as a child, I never really understood what that was and just assumed that anything I experienced, everyone else felt too. So it wasn't such a big deal. But then when I moved to New Zealand when I was 12, I had this massive spiritual awakening, as in started channeling and speaking to people's loved ones on the other side at 12 years old, brand new to the country with no friends. So I had this huge, like, what the heck is going on kind of period for about 2 years. And it was unstoppable. Like, I didn't even ask for it. It was just coming through me, and it drew relationships into my life that were very powerful. It was just massive confirmation for me that there is more to what we see. And to cut a very long story short, I kind of ended up suppressing that gift and that awareness for probably about 10 years due to various circumstances and people that then came into my life later. And it reawoke again in my 20s. And when I found kind of a tribe of people that were open to that, I started realizing what I could do with these gifts, because I didn't want to be, a medium who was just focused on one thing with just the speaking. I knew there was more for me in different areas, but it wasn't always a conscious thing. Like, I knew it was there, but I didn't know exactly how it was going to look. So that's the spiritual side and the young child side that has always been there. And then the grief and the navigating and helping other people navigate. From a young age, I've always been in leadership positions and always had that more extroverted personality where people have looked to me for guidance, or, I've been a mentor at school or a team leader or something like that right from a young age, all the way through high school. And my degree is in filmmaking and directing. Like, I always loved directing and writing and coming up with the plot for things. And when I left high school, before doing my degree, I went traveling and I became an au pair in France and ended up writing a book about that time of my life. And that, again, long story short, became a kind of platform to then start guiding young people leaving school who didn't know what to do with themselves or were having trouble with relationships and were trying to figure out who they were. And that became that book was called The Big Sister Project, and that became a coaching business for teenagers about 3 or 4 years. And over that time, my spiritual kind of awakening part 2 kind of came into play around the same time. And I ended up evolving that business and started working with more parents and families. And a big theme that kept coming up was that feeling of loss, that feeling of disconnection. And I realized grief isn't just about someone passing away, and that's what we often associate it with, but it's actually constantly underpinning everything. Like, it's the becoming of something new, and often it gets labeled as something else because it's easier to diagnose things and treat them rather than actually look at the heart underneath and the feeling underneath. And I had some personal big losses in my life over the past few years as well around the same time. It kind of just evolved into becoming more focused on helping people see things as grief so that they can actually work with that rather than resist it. This year, well, last year now, 2024, I stepped into becoming a funeral celebrant as well because, again, from personal experiences at funerals, I saw how they could be done very badly or not very fairly. And I wanted to make sure that people could grieve well and have closure when they lose someone. And I knew that I had the gifts to be able to help people with that. So it was kind of a natural progression.
Oh, amazing. Gosh, there's so much in that because, and I just mentioned it to you before, so often our young people, I say to them, what you're going to end up doing isn't actually been created or invented yet. And so you really have been on a soul journey to lead you to here. Yeah. So everything, making sense of everything kind of makes sense to you now, right?
Yeah.
I love that. And the fact that your spirituality was part of that journey, like it guided you through that journey. So I know often when I speak up about spirituality, people kind of sort of turn a blind eye or don't want to go there. But there's so much proof now of people who, when we do are soul led, that we end up in places that we're meant to be. So yeah, that's cool. And then the other part, and this came up in our Glitter and Grief, I felt too, because we had several nurses on that event, is when you talk about grief isn't just the person transitioning from life to death, that there's so many other transitions. And I know personally for me, I've transitioned into menopause. I've also transitioned through empty nest with my eldest daughter leaving home, and lots of transitions through creating Heart Place Hospital. So it's definitely something that I've experienced along. And another thing I just want to mention as well that you mentioned is often in our current conventional medical system that there can be grief and depression can actually measure at the same. So people can actually be treated for depression when in actual fact they're going through a cycle of grief. Yeah. So that was just perfect. Thank you so much. I wondered if you could share with us like some of the spiky parts of going through that experience. I know for me, through my transitions, and my grief transitions as well, there's spiky parts, but I like to think there's kind of silver linings from the lead linings. I wonder if you could share any of them that have come up for you.
So in my personal grief journey?
Yeah, just actually your journey to being a soul-led grief guide.
Okay.
Yeah.
In so many. And one thing I will say as well is that I've also, in that process, walked through what felt like fire. I could have self-diagnosed as depression. I could have self-diagnosed as anxiety. I could have, so at times, quite quite literally gone into a hobbit hole. Like, I've been through dark times in the past few years as a result of choosing to stay committed to the fact that I know I'm being led somewhere. And that isn't an easy job, because once you have that deep instinct and you know something has to change, and you know something's going to change eventually, whether you choose it or not, it can be really scary. And I just want to acknowledge that, because it could be very easy for me to sit here and say, oh, well, I've always been outgoing, and I'm a people person and blah, blah, blah. But actually, the relationships that I've had to navigate, and the backlash from people that don't necessarily believe what I'm saying, or have tried to, a bit of fear mongering and try and explain it as something else, has been huge, which is part of the reason why I shut down half of who I am, really, for a good decade. So those are the biggest spiky parts. But I guess in terms of choosing to work with it now, I think in a practical sense, going back to young people not knowing what they're going to do, or their job hasn't been invented yet, I think that links very well to the fact that age can sometimes work not against us, but, I've only just turned 30. And when I first started being a celebrant, for example, a huge thing for me was, well, no one's going to want a celebrant that's just started in their 20s. Like, traditionally, many of them are 50 plus. And I've literally walked up to, I've gone to a meeting at a house before with a family, and they opened the door expecting someone old, and they literally went, oh, like they said, oh, like there was a shock of like, oh, you're only like 29, what? So that I wouldn't say is a spiky part, but it's another thing to acknowledge, is that sometimes we can be met with physical resistance from people, or shock, and that can be enough to throw us sometimes and question whether we are doing the right thing. And it's actually now in the celebrant journey, it's actually worked in my favor, because now people will call on me deliberately because they want someone young and bubbly, and they know it's an option, so they will. But initially that could have been enough to throw me off, and it goes back to coaching teenagers as well. Even though I had the book about my coming of age experience as an au pair and all the life stuff after that, I also had that internal dialogue of what parent is going to listen to me when I actually recommend that their children don't just go to university straight away, because I'm like 25, like who's going to listen to me, so there's always those stories. And I think the biggest thing I've really learned is, if you believe it enough and you're enthusiastic about it enough, the right people will come in. And it took time to build what I've built, but now the words have rippled out and people know my energy. And I don't want to please everybody. I used to, but now I'm like, if you're not interested, that's fine. Like, go find your person. But that takes time to learn. So I don't even know if I've answered your question, but
no, you can. And I'm just sitting here going, here we are, both in white t-shirts, and I'm like, me too.
Yeah, quite funny.
And I think, like for me, creating Heart Place Soulful literally is in my bones. Like, it's do or die now. So, and I know I've had lots of resistance and lots of what I call crunchy times. But I, also have seen the growth that when you sit with the crunch, as we're designed, then, just such magic and miracles come out of that. So, no, you've absolutely answered that question. And I'm still loving going back to the young people, because I think, particularly now that we're having things like AI and really progressing in technology, it's just going to be really interesting what roles are going to be available. It's going to be very, and I see, because I've done a lot of work with young people too. I did that for about 5 years, and I think what they're going through now is those building blocks, is those experiences that they need so that they can be the change makers, so that they know what is needed to be created in the world next. So it's going to be a really interesting time to observe. Yeah, definitely.
It's already changed so much since I left school, and that was only 12 years ago. It's quite scary even saying that now, but it's crazy, because I was actually rereading my book not long ago, and I didn't have a smartphone. Like, I navigated my gap year without a smartphone. I don't even remember like life pre-Google Maps. Like I have no idea how I navigated all these foreign countries without a map on my phone. Like I can't even register that. So the fact that that is already foreign to me, I can't imagine like what's yet to come. Like
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Well, I've seen all sorts of cool stuff come in the medical world, so it's going to be really interesting. Yeah. So I really wanted to sort of weave in navigating the tools that are needed for navigating grief in a soulful way. I wonder if you could share some of those with us.
Yeah. So, excuse me. I again, a lot of them are kind of based in more holistic practices because typically, I think everything has its place. Like talk therapy and all the things that, like you said, the standard medical system goes for. Have all got their place. But the people I've worked with, and this isn't a tooting of my own horn, this is general feedback, is I have seen so many and heard from so many people that I've worked with, both in a group sense and one-to-one, that they didn't know this was possible, like a different way was possible, and that's what's put them off ever seeking healing, because they thought, well, I don't want to talk to a therapist for 7 years. Like some people have been in therapy for 7 years for the same thing. And they're not moving out. The whole point of, in my opinion, for things like that and coaches is an obsolete model. Like I'm not designed to be in your life forever unless it's like your cheerleader as well or something new happens. But if it's, I don't want to be in your life for 10 years talking about the same thing. Like that's not the point. Like, and it doesn't mean that. And I think grief is a sensitive one because people often, quite rightly, think that if I move on, then I'm neglecting or forgetting the person, or I'm dishonoring someone, and that is very deeply rooted and it's very hard to undo. And I even face that sometimes. So that's a natural human response. But what I like to do is really help people go inwards and see what else is there, because our brains won't tell us. Our brains will only ever give us things to protect us from big stuff or getting into any sort of conflict. So for me, a great one that I tend to do at my events is like meditational style stuff, like getting people to really tune into their breath. And it doesn't have to be super deep, but just getting them into a calm state so that they can listen to what's moving through them. And then instead of talking directly after that, getting them to do some guided writing, just brain dumping, just getting everything out their system, because until it's out, it's in. And if it's in, it's weight.
Yeah.
So if there's a way to get it out, you're losing weight just through doing that. You physically can lose weight from crying, from releasing energy like that, releasing emotions. And people don't know that. People really don't know that. And it's so fascinating to watch faces when they see the impact it can have. So, guided breath work, guided visualizations and release sessions are really big for me. I love getting people to write and guiding their thoughts. And a big one for me is the community side. Like we can't really grieve in isolation. We can, but ultimately we need people to be able to grow. Like people mirror stuff back to us. They support and they hold. And again, through personal experience, I've known what it's like to not have supportive people around me for what I needed. And I've seen what it's like to have them. So I've kind of found a way of like guiding conversations and setting up conversations that can help people feel heard and seen, and that then they can speak from their heart rather than their head and ask for what they need rather than what they think the other person can give. And the genuine connections can be made instead of just oh, hi, cool, how are you feeling? Yeah, I'm good. Like it's the superficial stuff, like the real stuff can come out, and then people can say what they need. And then if the person can meet that expectation, great. If they can't, they've got the choice to move on.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's we are seeing a shift in that in healthcare, but not enough, because there's just so much that we see in these environments, and the space and opportunities aren't given to be seen and heard. And that's obviously where Heart Place Hospital comes in, that we're providing a safe, soft sanctuary to land, and show up in either which way you are, whether mad, bad, sad or glad. And again, that's from my personal experience. When I was seeking it, I was just like, is this it? Is that it? Is this it? Like, it didn't meet my needs. So that's what we our integrity is to meet people where they're at and meet them with their needs. Yeah, beautiful. And so, what does hold us back from fully moving through grief?
The biggest one I think I've seen and probably experienced it as well is fear that they're going to forget.
Right. Yeah.
Or dishonor, like forget and dishonor in
Mm.
that same bubble of something's going to be wrong, something's not going to be there anymore, it's going to just disappear. And that we often get so attached to either a person or we're naturally wired for connection. So if someone's physically removed, it can be really traumatic. But again, if it's not a personal loss like that, but we're losing a sense of ourself, or we're moving on from a friendship group, that's a huge one. It's like some people don't resonate with people anymore, and they keep holding on and they're making themselves miserable because they don't know what's next. There's that fear of letting go of what was, and thinking that nothing else is going to take its place, or in the sense of losing someone, nothing's going to be like emerge that can help us still feel connected. And I think that's the biggest one. And I guess just touching on the spirituality side, for me, I've said this to a close friend of mine a few times, and she said the same back. I cannot imagine going through grief without having the spiritual connection that I have, or openness to. Like even just a thought that there's something else, like that's enough for me to be like, okay, I can get through this, even if it's really hard. Because if and this isn't a preach, this is just a general awareness that I've seen, and people that have come through my space that have got zero belief, zero connection, just opening to the conversation that, well, what if is enough for them to have a little bit more hope than they had before, a little bit more curiosity that there's more ways of doing things than what they've always learned or been exposed to. And I can't imagine my life without it now. Like there's no undoing. And it's beautiful to watch people just be a little bit curious about who they are. So I think, yeah, that can also be another one is, and it can come across quite harsh, but I'll just say it, is that can be another setback, is if people do not have any sort of sense of things are meant to happen for a reason, or people come into my life to mirror something, or each relationship is here for a purpose, or they're showing me something about myself, or there's more to come, or we go somewhere when we die. If they don't have any of that sort of philosophical outlook on life, life is a lot harder when stuff goes wrong.
Yeah, beautiful.
Turns on its head.
And it's interesting you touched on this, and I thought, yeah, bang on. When we heal these boundary wounds, that is what I call them, and you know they're generational, they're long. When we heal them, then there is we're now not using the adaptations that they manifested. We're actually showing up more in our authentic self. Hence, you finding a path at such a young age. And now it's becoming more mainstream to actually heal these boundary wounds.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's not for the faint-hearted, it's not for the weak-hearted, because it doesn't mean that it's all rainbows and unicorns. It actually means that there is a letting go, and whether it's relationships or actual physical places or whatever it is. And so then there is a grief process in that too. So and that's why I love internal family systems. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that type of therapy, but it actually it honours all your parts. So you can be happy, but also be experiencing grief at the same time. And I know that personally, I've had a lot of judgment around that. Like, oh, this is going on in her life, and she's happy. Like, and so then you're like, oh, I've got to show it like this. And although now I've choose not to step into that. But there's now I've experienced it so much in the last few years myself. You're so right. Having a guide, having a community, and this is Heart Place Hospital being the umbrella to this, is being the conduit to people to find these guides, to find these communities, is so pivotal to us having a thriving society.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one thing we should focus on more, and intergenerational as well.
Mm.
Like teenagers are often some of the loneliest nowadays, and I think, to be honest, putting them with more lonely teenagers can sometimes not be the best benefit, because then you trauma bond and end up bonding over all the things that are bad in your life. Whereas having and then if you put someone who's happy into that to disrupt it, there's jealousy and envy and trying to take them down that can come in, and it's not anyone's fault. It's conditioning. It's fear. But sometimes, I've got so many friends, and I always have since I was young, actually. I was always the one that would go and talk to the adults as a kid. But I think there's so much value in having friends that are of all ages. Like, I consider my friends 4-year-olds and 6-year-olds and babies, because I'm like, cool, what are you, like, we're having fun. Like, cool. And then I've got friends in their retirement years that are just as close in a different way. So I think that is also a kind of a social stigma that can be broken down more, especially in New Zealand, I find.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, that's in the more olden days, in the village days, that's exactly what happened. We would sit in circle with all different archetypes and different ages, and we would learn from the wisdom keepers, and share with our different archetypes, so that when you came to the next one, it wasn't such a surprise. Whereas that's what we've experienced. It's like, what? I didn't know this. Why didn't anyone tell me this? Yeah, and I think that's definitely what we're seeing. It's definitely seen with our podcast guests is these people who are stepping in and pioneering and creating these opportunities. And I know one of our guests, she said something similar. She does. She's a medical intuitive, and she went through a fertility journey, and she surrounded herself with other people going through fertility journeys, and in hindsight she's like, actually, I would have preferred to spend time with the outliers, those who had actually overcome that journey. And so that's the sort of space she's now creating, so, which is beautiful. So we're all having these experiences, and then now we're creating the spaces of what we needed. Yeah.
No, it's so good. It's so good. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about the way the world of work is going as well. Like you said, for young people, it's actually starting to intentionally create the space in advance of the job even existing, because then the work will come as a result when you see what the gaps are.
Yeah. I also just want to add, I listened to a podcast, The Diary of the CEO, this week, and just really relevant to what we're talking about, and talked about dopamine and how addicted to dopamine we are, and which we need. It's our pleasure chemical, but we actually need to balance that pain and pleasure, and so, but when we're experiencing pain, we just go straight to something that'll bring up our pleasure, which is not great for our nervous system. So exactly what you're saying, creating these spaces of being able to go in and to feel, reveal, deal, and then heal, if that's part of your journey, is just so pivotal. And it's not about, okay, let's go do it, tick the box, get it done, move through it. It's actually allowing for it, however long it's going to be, but to give space to it. And I know, and we're all guilty of it. We'll avoid that pain, but it's actually this message. It's a message, and you got it through your traveling, which manifested you creating a book, which is has just escalated you on your path now. Yeah.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
We never know. You never know what.
You never know. I would never have said 10 years ago that I would be founding a heart place hospital. So there you go.
So magical.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Ellie. Thank you so much. I think this is a really important message at this time, because there's so much shifting in the world, in individually, all of us. So I think it's great to have this in our kete, and I just love to know if you could share with our listeners where people can find you, and also something that's coming up in your heart place that you can share with our listeners.
Oh, that's so exciting. So I have a website. It's just my name.com, so elliebambury.com. I'm on Facebook and Instagram is Ellie Bambury Soul First Living. With Instagram, I think there's an underscore between my name and Soul First Living though. So that's how you can reach me online. I run, I keep saying this year, it was last year. Last year I was running events called Glitter and Grief, and they were in the community. And life became a little bit full towards the end of the year, so things adapted slightly, but it is still something that I have as an offering, but the way it's delivered is shifting slightly. So I'm going to target it more towards people that would request personalized gatherings for their community or their family, you know, if they've just lost a family member and they need help navigating the grief between them. It's something that I'm going to focus more towards personalized care for people in specific communities rather than bringing all of different walks of life together, because as magical as that is, it can also be quite challenging as well for everyone to feel completely seen or vocalize what they might want to say. And it doesn't mean that I won't do it again. I actually have I'm still open to coming to new communities and running those. But if anyone would like to have more information about what Glitter and Grief is, just reach out or check my website. And we can talk about how that can look personal, family as well.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. And we'll definitely be sharing you through Heart Place Hospital as one of our service providers. So thank you so much, Ellie. I've really enjoyed this morning, and thank you for being our first of 2025. And look forward to see where the world takes us this year.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's so exciting to be the first one for 2025 as well. I can't quite.
Yeah. All right. Take care. Have a great day.
You too. Bye.